Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala shunbiya al-mursaleen Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Wa ba'd, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to lesson 1 of the book Maraqi Sa'adat by Imam Shumbrali, which is translated as Ascent to Felicity. The picture on your screen is the front cover, inshallah, and hopefully you can get a copy of that. This is a classical book which, alhamdulillah, has been translated in the Hanafi school of jurisprudence. And if you've studied the iSyllabus diploma, you will have covered a module called Traditional Scholars, where we discussed how knowledge is passed on and how it's passed on from the Prophet's generation to the subsequent generations until ourselves. And when it came to jurisprudence, you will see that there were 4 accepted schools of law throughout the generations from that time. The first of which is the Hanafi school, which was the person, the first started that school. Well, didn't start the school, but the methodology of all of that goes back to him, is Imam Abu Hanifa, and then it's the students that document the school. Like all the other schools, that's what happens. The students tend to document the school, and it is considered one of the 4 accepted Sunni schools of law. In terms of adherence, it's got the most out of the 4, the least being the Hanbali school. And the other 2 schools, obviously, the Shafi school and the Maliki school, which are also very well known across the Muslim world. So we'll be working our way through this book. It does actually begin with a short section on creed, on Islamic creed and on belief, which we're not going to cover because we have a whole course covering creed, Fiqh Akbar with Shaykh Ridwan in depth. So it's quite basic in this book, but the main section of it, and the majority of the book, is to do with jurisprudence, and that's what inshallah we are going to cover. I would highly recommend you get a copy of the book. I will be putting the book up on the screen so we can follow it together. There's an introduction to the book which you should read, but generally speaking, it's the author, Imam Shumbrali, has a book called Nur Idah. In fact, I'll bring up one of the sections of the book. This is page 20 in my copy. Where he actually mentions, well, it's not him actually, it's the person who's done the footnotes, Faraz Khan, Sheikh Faraz Khan, done an excellent job, which is one of the reasons we actually chose this book, because his more famous book, this author Imam Shumbrali, is the book Nur Idah. And Nur Idah is the first, if you look down where I've highlighted in red where it says Imdad in the middle, it says Shumbrali's Imdad al-Fattah on his Nur al-Idah. Nur al-Idah is the main text that you would find taught in Islamic ceremonies across the seminaries across the world. So if you went to a madrasa, they would teach you this book as the starting point of where to learn your purification, Tahara, and also prayer. It's quite detailed. The same author, so the author had an extremely large book which is called Imdad al-Fattah, which is underlined there. And then if you go, it's also, well, I don't know if it's mentioned, it must mention it here, yep. It's, if you go down to the second last, where he says Tahawi's Hashia on Shumbrali's Maraqi al-Falah. So Maraqi al-Falah, so the Imdad al-Fattah was his original book, right? It was quite large, and then he kind of condensed it into what's called Maraqi Falah, right? Maraqi Falah is basically a commentary on Nur al-Idah, right? And then that was further condensed into, you could say that is further condensed into Nur al-Idah. These are all by the same author. This book, Maraqi Sa'adat, translated as Ascent to Felicity, is an even smaller summary of all these books. So it's smaller than Nur al-Idah. It's actually a summary of Nur al-Idah. But the benefit of this book and the reason for us choosing it is the footnotes. The footnotes by Faraz Khan are extremely useful. So the top of the book, I'll show you in a minute, the top of the section is the actual ascent to felicity, the book, and then underneath it he has his footnotes. And what he's managed to do successfully is really bring from all the other books the most relevant information you need to know, which makes it a very, very good working book. This you can work with it. It's very easily accessible. It's easy to read. It mentions the most relevant mas'alas, because fiqh is, it can go on and on and on. There's no end to it. There's lots of detail. But for us, who just want to get on with our lives day to day, this actually is going to be, inshallah ta'ala, a resource book for you, which you can go back to time and time again for yourself and also for other people when you're answering questions, and also maybe teaching family members or in your own circles. So this, I think it's important to look at these this section abbreviations, because these are the books he'll be mentioning in the footnotes, and you need to have a decent idea. I'm not going to go through all of them. They're all books from the Hanafi school, but a couple I wanted to highlight. The first one is the fourth one down, Birghavi. It says his treatise on menstruation. This has been translated into English and is extremely useful for sisters, obviously, but it gives you in detail all the mas'alas regarding menstruation. So we will cover menstruation in lesson 5, but obviously it's, we're covering the basic rules. If you want in-depth rulings, then that's the book to get, and the good news is that it is actually in English, so it's available. You can get your hands on it. The next one down I've highlighted is Hidayah, Mirghiniani's commentary on his Bidatul Mubtadi'. So Hidayah, so it's a commentary on Bidatul Mubtadi'. So Bidatul Mubtadi' would be the primary text, so what's called the matan. So very often they're very short, the matan, and then underneath it will have a commentary. So the commentary is Hidayah. That actually is also translated into English. You can get hold of it, and this would be the final text that is generally taught in the madrasas in the Indian subcontinent. Imdad, which is the original book by this author, Shumbur Ali, right, which he then like I said, made into the Maraqi Farah, and then that became Nur al-Idah, and then it eventually became this book, Ascent to Felicity. Or you could say Nur al-Idah, this Ascent to Felicity is a summary of Nur al-Idah. Nur al-Idah is the book I was mentioning that we generally taught in madrasas as a first text. Next one is Nurdin Itar's Al-Hajj wal-Umrah. This has also been translated, although we're not going to do it right now. We will do it right at the end of this course, Hajj and Umrah. But that's an extremely useful book to have in English, and it covers the different schools as well, which is very useful at Hajj time. And the next one down is Rad, which is Ibn Abidin Shami. He says here Shami because from Bilad al-Shami is from Syria, and in Indian subcontinent they generally refer to him as Shami. But his book Radd al-Muhtar, and this is sometimes called the Hashia Ibn Abidin, and I'll generally mention it as the Hashia, right? It's the commentary on the actual text. Why is it significant? This name Ibn Abidin, get used to it. It will be coming up a lot. I will mention it as well. He mentions it in his footnotes excessively as well. Why? Because he's of the later Hanafi scholars. And being a later scholar, he's obviously got the benefit of looking at all the different texts and everything that's been said. And what he helps us do is arrive at what is the fatwa position of the Hanafi school. Because you might see different things in books, so maybe there's two opinions mentioned. He will then give you, based on the evidences, what is the stronger opinion that we should be relying upon. So when it comes to fatwa, Ibn Abidin is the person we go to, and what he says is very significant. And then the last one I want to look at is Tahtawi, and that is a commentary on Maraqi Falah. So Maraqi Falah from this author, Shurun Burali, and that's the text I actually studied in Syria. And then that has a hashia, that has a commentary. So if something you're not sure of what it means, you go to the commentary and see what extra information has been given or to explain that, or maybe evidence and so forth. So these are the ones that you generally, apart from Itar and Birghavi that I just mentioned there because they're good ones to have, but the other ones, Hidayah, Imdad, Rad and Tahtawi, you see used over and over again. Also Maraqi Falah will also come up quite a lot. Okay, so that's enough of the different various books, and we want to start now on my copy. It's page 41. And like any book on fiqh, any book on jurisprudence, they will start with Tahara, with purification. And he says purification, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, purification is valid with the following types of water. So we'll read most of the footnotes. Obviously, you can read in your own time. I would encourage you to read the introduction to this text. But pay attention to the footnotes that we actually read. But you can obviously read all of them. I do tend to cover most of the footnotes because they're very useful. Number one, he says 50. So 50, the first footnote 50 says legally, so I'm now down where the footnotes are. Legally, purification refers to the removal of filth from one's body, garments, and place of prayer. So before you can pray, you have to be purified. That means there has to be your body, right, your actual physical body, your garments, so your clothes, and also the place that you're praying, right, the place that you're going to do sajda and put your knees down and so forth. These three need to be free of filth, of najasa, before you can pray, as well as the removal of one's state of ritual impurity, thereby rendering the person in a state of ritual purity. So if you, for example, have been to the bathroom, you need to do wudu to pray, and if you've had obviously sexual relations, then you'd have to do ghusl, which we'll cover as well. So those who have done the diploma course will know that some of this is, we're basically building on the stuff that you have already covered, but going into more depth now. And so back up to the top, it says what type of water now can you use to perform wudu. You can use rainwater, well water, spring water, river water, sea water, even if it's salty, right? And water from melted snow or hail. Such water may be used for purification as long as it remains purifying, right? So purifying, the Arabic would be mutahhir, right? The water has to be tahir, which is pure, but it has to also be mutahhir. In other words, it's pure, it's clean, but it also has the ability to purify, it also has the ability to cleanse, because if it doesn't have the ability to cleanse, then you can't get yourself into a state of wudu. So you can have pure water which is not purifying, tahir ghair mutahhir, right? In other words, if that water lands on me, it's not going to render my clothes impure because there's no filth in there, but I can't use that water to make wudu, right? So it has to be not only pure, but has to be purifying. So 51, if we look, that says the above list is not restrictive, right? So that is just giving examples at the moment, rainwater and so on. It says there, rather it only serves to provide examples of water in nature that may be used for wudu and ghusl, namely unconditioned water. This is in contrast to water that is conditioned. What does conditioned mean? Meaning that it may not be referred to simply as water or water, but rather needs a further description that conditions it in order to be accurately defined, such as rose water. So we can't just call this water anymore. It has another description, rose water. That is, rose water cannot be called water without the description rose that conditions it, while spring water or river water may be accurately identified by the term water alone, and hence is unconditioned. If I got water from the spring, I could just say that I've got a cup of water. Right? But if I got rose water and poured it into a bottle, I can't say this is water, I'd say it's rose water. So that's quite an important distinction here, because if you go back up, it says it has to be purifying, namely to remain with its natural characteristics. Its natural characteristics, which is what? Fluidity, and also the kind of the thinness of water, or it's not like thick, it becomes like lumpy and almost like glue-like, right? So that's not what that would take it away from its natural characteristics. So with its natural characteristics, with nothing having mixed with it such as to condition it, thereby removing its purifying quality. So rose water is pure. Rose water fell on my clothes. Do I need to change my clothes? No. Right? If wine fell on it, yes, well, I do. Right? Because it's filth. But rose water is not filth. But can I make wudu with rose water? No, I can't. So, where are we? So thereby removes its purifying quality. This applies whether the water is flowing or in a large cistern, namely one with a surface area of at least 10 by 10 cubits with a depth such that its floor is not exposed by scooping water out with both hands. An approximation is, this is the next approximation, 10 cubits by 10 cubits, to judge whether a quantity of water is small or large. Why is that significant? I'm just about to explain that. So, if we go to this, so we have a couple of situations. So if I've got water, right, I've got water and I want to make wudu. If it's pure water, it's fine. Now, what happens if leaves have fallen into that water? At which point is it still purifying? In other words, at which point can I make wudu? For me to make wudu, it has to be purifying. So, let's look at these four. So the first one is a solid has mixed with the water, right? So you have a couple of situations here. The first one is that a solid has mixed with the water. So what's a solid? Let's just say soap, right? Let's just take the example of soap. Soap has fallen into a bucket of water. What is the ruling here? It says wudu can be done. So this is not in your book or your notes. This is me adding from my own notes. So wudu could be done with this type of water where a solid has fallen in. So say a bar of soap's fallen in. Even if all three properties of the solid appear. So for example, the taste. So you put water in your mouth and you can taste the soap. Smell. You put your nose next to the bucket and you can smell soap. And the colour. Let's just say the soap was, I don't know, green or something, and it's the colour of the water has changed to green. As long as the water's characteristics, that's what it said in line number 4, with its it says namely to remain with its natural characteristics, right? Natural characteristics. So if we still identify it as water, if I would say that's water, it's a bucket of water, right? So the main characteristics of the water has not changed, which is the fluidity. It's still got the same fluidity of water, and the thickness riqqa. It's not become like really thick, so it's become like like you get this liquid soap in bottles you use in bathrooms. It's not become like liquid soap that you'd say no, that's liquid soap, but it's if I looked at that and I'd said no, it's still water, it still has the characteristics of water, I can use it. So in other words, we're still referring to it as water. So let's just say saffron. So saffron used to use in the past as a dye as well, and also as a colouring. It was also put in food. So if saffron falls into that bucket of water, you know, as long as we would still regard it as water, we can use it. But when it gets to the point where it's changed so much that it's more useful for dyeing clothes and rather than using it as like similar to water, then at that point you'd have to say it's saffron water, isn't it? It's no longer water. And we have evidence for this because it's been reported that the Prophet made a ghusl with water which had traces of dough in it. That's been narrated by An-Nasa'i. So the second one is a liquid. So a liquid has mixed with the water. Now here, it depends on what qualities or what properties that liquid has. If it has two properties like taste and colour, or say smell and taste, or colour and smell, if one of these qualities appears, then you cannot make wudu with that water. It's pure, but it's not purifying. If it's got three properties, an example of that would be vinegar. Right? Vinegar has colour, it has taste, and it has smell. If one of those properties appears, so you've put vinegar into water, but all you can really, the colour's not changed, right? The smell is not changed, all it's changed is the taste, one quality, then you can make wudu with it. But where two qualities appear, for example, the taste and the smell is changed, then you can no longer make wudu with that water. If it had none of those properties, and you'd say, well, what is water with no properties? Because obviously, like say rose water, okay, it doesn't have colour, but it does have taste, it does have smell, doesn't it? Whereas used water, so that's water I did wudu, and then the water fell into the bucket, okay, after I made wudu, and that's used water. Now the used water, can I make wudu with that? No, I can't. It's pure, but it's not purifying. As soon as it comes off my limbs, it ceases to be purifying. So if I had used water and I mixed it with water, as long as the used water is not the majority, because if there was two buckets of used water and one bucket of just clean water and I mixed it, well, the majority is used water, so we would refer to it as used water. But if there's two buckets of water and one bucket of unused water, two buckets of clean water and one bucket of used water, and I mixed them, the majority is just water, and therefore wudu would be possible. It would still be purifying. So that's the different situations where a pure substance has mixed with water, whether it's a solid or whether it's a liquid. Now, what happens if an impure substance falls into the water? Najasa. If an impurity falls into the water, it depends on whether it's a small quantity or a large quantity, which is what he's referring to when we were looking at the text when it said this ruling applies whether the water is flowing or in a large cistern, namely one of the surface area and so on, right? So what he basically means here, this idea of a large cistern or a small one. So what happens now is if now we're talking about, I'm going to mention najasa. It's not really mentioned here, but because it's relevant to making wudu. And if you go to page 64 in my book, the first paragraph discusses that. But I'm just going to mention this anyway. So if a najasa fell into the water, can I make wudu from it or not? Well, if it is a large quantity of water, and he in the text said 10 cubits by 10 cubits, which is approximately 462 centimeters by 462 centimeters in terms of like size, and that if you would scoop from that type of water, the bottom would be not exposed, so it's got that much water, like a small paddling pool or something. And this is one modern writer has approximated this to be 216 litres. So if it's above 216 litres of water, right, that's large. If it's less than that, then it's small. So for a large quantity of water, if an impurity fell into it, then as long as one of the three properties does not change, you can still make wudu from it. What are the three properties? Taste, smell, colour. Right, so you're in a, I don't know, you're about to make wudu from a lake or something, or a pond, and you knew that a dog had, I don't know, I'm just making this up now, maybe a dog's urinated or somebody's urinated at one end of the pond. But where you're making the wudu from, right, or where the water, it's not changed any of the properties. It's not changed the taste, it's not changed the smell, and it's not changed the colour. You can make wudu from that water. But if it's a small amount of water, which is less than 216 litres, right, less than 10 cubits by 10 cubits, small amount of water, even if one drop of urine fell into it, you cannot make wudu from it. So that's the difference between a small amount of water and a large amount of water. And you can, in my copy, you'd go to page 64. The first paragraph actually discusses this, but I'm just mentioning it now because it's relevant, inshallah. Okay, so moving on. Also, if we look at this verse, this is a verse of wudu. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions four things, right? فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ, wash your faces, وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ, your arms to your elbows, وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ, and wipe your heads, وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْنِ, and your feet until and including the ankles. There's four things. That's why the Hanafi school says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only mentions four things in the verse. If you do these four things, then you are in a state of wudu, irrespective whether you did it in sequence or not, whether you had the intention or not, because that's what's mentioned. The four things, as long as you do those four things, you have covered the bare minimum. And I'm just using this verse because it's important for us to understand how scholars extrapolate rulings from one verse. So this is one verse, we all agree it's Quran, but the schools have come to different conclusions. The Hanafi school said there's 4 obligatory acts. The Shafi school said 6. So what the two they added? They said intention and sequence. Where did they get the intention sequence? They said, well, everything requires intentions. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, the first hadith in Bukhari. Okay, so that applies to everything. That's the first evidence for intention. Second, they said that if you look at this verse, it mentions washing the face, washing the arms, wiping the head, and washing the feet. So it mentions 2 things that have to be washed, then one thing which is wiped, and then another thing which is washed. Whereas logically, from a language perspective, you would just mention all the things that are washed first or together, and the thing which is different, you would mention that separately. But the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put the wiping of the head in between the washing of the arms and washing of the feet is because He wants to show us that the sequence is also significant, and therefore it is an obligation. The Hanafi school would come back and say, well, you can see, like I've highlighted the waw in red. They would say, well, the waw, وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ وَامْسَحُوا, waw in language is like and in English. It doesn't necessarily mean sequence. It just means, if I say John came and Andy came and Bashir came, right? It doesn't mean they all came in that sequence. It just meant they came. It could be that they came in different order. So it's like and. So that again, so scholars will look at the language, they'll look at other evidences and so on. And then this thing about bi ru'usikum, that ba, does that mean the entire head? That's how the Hanbali school and the Maliki school understood it. Or does that mean some of the head, which is the way the Shafi school understood it? So they said a few hairs is fine. And the Hanafi said, well, what do you use to wipe your head? Your hand. So it would be enough, what the surface area of your hand, which is approximately a quarter. So from that one ba, we have 3 different opinions, you see, and all are correct, and all are using the Quran, right? So it just shows you, just a simple look at that verse. It shows you the different ways of understanding text. Okay, I haven't finished the first part, so I'll go back to that. So it says ablution, right? So we just looked at the verse of ablution of wudu. It says the obligatory integrals, this is the fard, and plural is fara'id of wudu are 4, right? So I've already explained why the Hanafi school that said there's only 4. And in the footnote 52, it says an obligatory integral fard is that which is an action, which an action is composed of, and that which must be performed for the action to be complete and valid. If you miss the fard, the wudu is invalid. You miss a fard in anything, it's going to invalidate it. If any one integral is omitted, the entire action is deemed invalid, and the person would have incurred sin if they intentionally omitted it. If you intentionally try to miss something which is fard, and you know it's fard, and you're just doing it intentionally, it'd be sinful. A mandatory requisite wajib is that which must also be performed. However, its omission does not entail invalidity, but it does entail sin if intentional, and it would be makruh tahrimi, and considered to be a minor sin. So the Hanafi school does differentiate between a fard and a wajib. Fard is something which is established by Quran or a mutawatir hadith, and the meaning is clear. There's no room for discussion. A wajib is something which is open to discussion. It could be that it's a the Quran mutawatir text in hadith, but there is different ways of looking at it, or it is clear, there is only one way of looking at it, but it is not a mutawatir hadith. A mutawatir hadith is that which has been translated such a large number to such a large number to such a large number that there is no question of its authenticity. And there's only 300 or so hadith which are like that. The rest are all ahad hadith, right? They're all hadith which have been rated by 1 people or 2 people or 3 people. And so there's always that element of human error that can exist, even if it's 0.00001%. And because of that, we can't give it the same status as something which has no percentage of error, right? So you can't equate the two texts. The strength of this text is lower, and therefore they said, well, it's still obligatory, but we will call it wajib and not fard. So fard is stronger than wajib in the Hanafi school. Okay, so the next part is he's going through now the different things. The first one he said was washing the face, whose lengthwise demarcation is from the top of the forehead to the bottom of the chin for someone without a thick beard, right? So top of the forehead, right? Top of the forehead to the bottom of the chin for someone without a thick beard, and for one with a thick beard to the bottom of the beard that lies on the face, as opposed to the hair that hangs below the chin. Now, if a person is bald, it would be where the natural hairline would have been, right? The natural kind of hairline. It doesn't have to start right at the back, right? So that's in terms of its length. Right? So we would say, just to make it clearer, from the top of the forehead, right? So the forehead, the bottom of the chin, right? Bottom of the chin. And its width is from one earlobe to the other, even if for someone with a beard, right? And now here it's important to get this part. So this space here, in between my beard and my earlobe, this has to be washed, right? So it has to be very important to wash this part. It's the entire face, all the way until the earlobe. So this part has to be washed. This part between the hair and my ear. Right. So it says, if we look at the footnote 53, the legal definition of washing is causing water to flow over the area such that it drips with a minimum of 2 drips. So the question here now becomes, obviously we're getting into real nitty gritty, is when do we say something is wiping, and when do we say something is washing? They said, well, if when you've poured the water, 2 drops, 1, 2 have come down, that's the bare minimum for us to to consider that as washing. If it doesn't come off, that's just wiping. You just putting water on. It's not considered to be a type of washing. It's considered to be wiping. And it's important, especially if you're making wudu from a bottle of water or something, you don't have much water, to know how much water you need to use. Number 54 says, regarding the obligatory integral washing of washing the face, it's sufficient to wash the exterior of a thick beard. Thick meaning that beneath that which the skin cannot be seen. So if you look at, like, for example, my beard, right, I wouldn't have to, I'd wash, and as long as the water has gone over the front of my beard on top of it, that's sufficient. I don't have to rub my fingers into the skin underneath. However, if I had a thin beard, then you'd have to do that. For a thin beard, however, water must reach the underlying skin itself, which occurs naturally when running water over the face, since the skin appears from beneath a thin beard. Washing the two arms up to and including the elbows. And remember, washing, when we're saying washing, just to wash the face once, because the sunnah is 3 times, but washing once is sufficient for the bare minimum, the fard. And again, in a situation where you don't have much water, it would be important, because you'd only probably use it once if you have limited water supply and you don't have enough to wash every limb 3 times. Wiping a fourth of the head. So we already discussed through that verse why they said a fourth of the head. It's approximately the surface areas of your hand. If you look at 56, it says the demarcation of the head is that above the ears. Hence, one may not wipe over the hair that hangs below the ears, even if tied up above the head. Rather, the hair that is wiped must grow out from above the ears. And that's important, and probably more so for sisters when they're wiping underneath their hijab, that they don't just catch the hair at the bottom. So what's important here is that you're not just, like, maybe you've put gel in your hair or something, and you just kind of, you get a wet hand and you just kind of put almost like at the back of the neck, right? You just kind of touch that area. That's not going to be considered. The head's going to be this entire area, right, from starting from my forehead and going towards the back of my neck. So we're basically my ears, right, up to my ears. So that area is a quarter of that is what we're talking about, and not just kind of almost the back of the neck. That's not going to be considered. So if you're sister and you're putting your hand through your hijab, just make sure it goes above the kind of, don't just do the neck area, just go a wee bit higher, inshallah. And it's just to the best of your knowledge that you've covered a fourth of your head. Washing the 2 feet up to and including the ankles. The Shia understand the verse as wiping the feet, and so they don't wash, they wipe their feet. But Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah all wash the feet. The emphasized sunnahs. So an important footnote here, number 57. An emphasized sunnah mu'akkada emphasized, is that which the Prophet ﷺ or his rightly guided successors after him perform regularly and consistently without omission, except once or twice. So what's the difference between something which is an obligation, something which is sunnah? The Prophet ﷺ in a sunnah would have left it once or twice just to show people that it's not an obligation. So what are examples? Like the adhan, the iqamah, praying in congregation, jama'ah, rinsing the mouth and the nose in wudu, that's sunnah mu'akkada. Leaving a sunnah once without valid excuse is mildly disliked, right? And entails doing wrong, isa'a. things are, this has been worded differently in different books. Let me just read the whole thing, then I'll explain. If one persistently leaves a sunnah without an excuse, then it could be sinful depending on the level of emphasis, as some sunnah acts are more emphasized than others. However, the sin is deemed less severe than incurred by a mandatory, mentioning a mandatory wajib, and a forti an obligatory act. So obviously, opposite of fard is haram, right? Opposite of wajib is makruh tahrimi. It's severely disliked, right? It would be a minor sin. Then you have sunnah mu'akkada, an emphasized sunnah, and the opposite of that is called isa'a. Now, if you leave this, he's saying if you leave it out once, it's makruh tanzihi, without a valid excuse. If you don't have a valid excuse, and it says entails wrongdoing. Other places it says if you leave it once or twice, it's okay, as long as it's not habitual, and the in doing wrong or blameworthiness only kicks in if you're consistently leaving the sunnah, because the whole emphasis of sunnah is we're supposed to be following the Prophet ﷺ, and if we're not, then it's almost as if we're our actions are indicating that the sunnah is not significant, otherwise you'd be doing it. So it's like we're devaluing the sunnah, and so there's a level of blame. And if you consistently leave the sunnah, it's as if you're consistently not following the Prophet ﷺ, so which is the whole point of the whole point of religion is to follow him. So there's an element of sin, but it's not like leaving a wajib. So we already said a wajib is a minor sin, and so then after that you have sunnah mu'akkada. Then you have sunnah ghair mu'akkada, sunnah which is not emphasized. The Prophet did it sometimes, didn't do it sometimes. Opposite of that is makruh tanzihi, which is mildly disliked. The same as what is considered to be disliked in all other schools. They don't have a differentiation in between makruh tahrimi and tanzihi. They just say everything is makruh, right? So they have makruh, which means there's no sin. So leaving the sunnah mu'akkada is in between a minor sin, which is leaving a wajib, and no sin, which is makruh tanzihi. So it's in between, and the way to reconcile that is, well, if you did it once or twice, it's okay, because you've not because the Prophet did that, he left it once or twice as well. But if you start consistently leaving it on a daily basis or regularly, then there's an element of either blameworthiness, and some even said an element of sin. It's like not like no sin. It's not like minor sin. It's like in between. It's like some Ibn Abidin, one place calls it itham yasir. It's a very minimal, or a slight sin, you could say, translate as. So he's going to now list 17 of the most important sunnahs. The first one is niyyah, intention, right? And this is an obligation according to the other schools. So it's an obligation according to the other schools. If you don't have intention, your wudu will not be correct in the other schools. Hanafi school, if you did wudu and didn't have intention, you'd miss the sunnah, but the actual wudu is correct. Using a toothstick, miswak. Okay. Now, the Hanafi school says if you do the siwak, right, any prayer that you pray with that wudu, it's 70 times better than a prayer where you didn't do the siwak. The Shafi school understood that hadith as any prayer you do with siwak. So so it's not just in wudu, but before they pray, if you do siwak, you will get the reward of those the prayer being 70 times better than without siwak. They understood it like that. The Hanafi school said no, it's if you do the siwak at the time of wudu, then every prayer you pray with that is going to be better than 70 prayers without it. If you don't have the toothstick, you can use your fingers or anything else. Mentioning the name of Allah, tasmiyah, so saying Bismillah Rahman Rahim. This is an obligation according to the Hanbali school, although they say if you to intentionally leave it, it's a problem because it's an obligation. But if you forgot, if you forgot to say the Bismillah, then your wudu would be okay, according to the Hanbali school. So saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim at the beginning is sunnah for the Hanafi school as well. And then he says washing the hands up to and including the wrists in the beginning of wudu. And footnote 59 says the intention and mentioning of the name of Allah are also to be done at the onset of wudu. Well, the toothstick is to be used before or while rinsing the mouth. Another position in the Hanafi school, which is not mentioned here, which is similar to the Shafi school. The Shafi school basically says when you make wudu, then the time of intention is when you wash your face. Where did they get that? Because they say the first thing Allah mentions in the Quran, فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ, wash your faces, and therefore that is the time of making intention. So when you wash your face, you have to make intention of wudu. The Hanafi school also has that position, but here it mentions the other position, which is to do the intention at the beginning of the wudu. Using the toothstick is deemed a sunnah of the wudu itself, not the prayer. That's what I was mentioning before, inshallah. And it says, yeah, if you don't have a toothstick, you can use your fingers instead, inshallah ta'ala. And then the next thing he says is maintaining the correct order of limbs as Allah Most High has listed in his book, which is what we will begin with in our next lesson, insha'Allah ta'ala. So before the next lesson, make sure that you go over what we've covered, inshallah ta'ala. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq in our learning. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam taslim kathira. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil